Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has accepted the resignation of Prime Minister Rami and his cabinet in a move seen as a bid by Abbas to strengthen his position as a decade-old political split deepens. Now, the government, it is expected, will be made up of parties that are members of the PLO only, and this excludes Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, inviting much uproar from these quarters. Meanwhile, there's development in the West Bank as Palestinians have accused Israel on Tuesday of trying to get rid of witnesses to its actions in the occupied area from this flashpoint city, Hebron. Israel has ejected a foreign observer force that was helping safeguard residents there. Now, tensions remain high on either side of the fence with the latest developments that are taking place. And to find out more how these will unfold and affect the people of Palestine, Gaza, West Bank in the days to come, let's talk to our panel of experts. First of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Rami al-Maghari, who's joining us from Gaza. He's a political analyst. Welcome to the show. And we also have Mr. Muslim Imran. He's a Palestinian activist who is also joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Welcome to the Newswire program. Let's start with you, Mr. Al-Maghari. As this resignation has been accepted, how do you see this affecting the events that are now unfolding there?
Yes, first, thank you for inviting me to this show. Let me just explain to you that the resignation of the consensus government, acceptance by the Palestinian president, and the whole issue itself is considered as a part of Palestinian authorities' measures for Gaza over the past several months, over the past 1 year and a half, beginning with the cuts of the salaries of the Palestinian PA and some restrictive measures for Gaza. This is a part of the state of a split between Palestinians, between the Fatah Party, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and the Islamist Party Hamas in Gaza, based on the failure by both parties to recognize or to realize a unity deal or a unity between themselves. Actually, Hamas has reserved over the resignation of the government of Rami al-Hamdallah, and saying that this should include not only the elections for the parliamentary, but for the parliament, but also presidential elections, as well as the Palestinian National Council and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This is the main reservation by Hamas. And Hamas also says that this should be followed, this should be done after both Fatah and Hamas has reached a unity deal among themselves. And I would like to hint here at the fact that in 2011, 2017, the Palestinians agreed over holding all these elections, the parliamentary, presidential, Palestinian National Council, and the Palestine Liberation Organization, while the move by Abbas is only pertaining to the Palestinian Legislative Council, which had been dissolved recently by the Palestinian Constitutional Court, which has been already rejected by Hamas. And this is something that might deepen the division between Hamas and Fatah, between Gaza and the West Bank. I would like also to hint at the fact that the Palestinian political factions here in Gaza and the West Bank are having some sort of unclear position towards or stance towards the resignation of the consensus government, and discussions are underway. Mainly, and mainly, there is a sort of reference to having the elections conducted on basis of proportion-based elections, which has been refused by Hamas. Hamas suggests that this should be done within the constituency and the lists of parties, the elections, the parliamentary elections. And I would like to say that this might take weeks or months until the picture is clear, and discussions are underway, and Hamas might reconsider its position towards the resignation of the government, and the Palestinian political factions might have some kind of a unified position towards it. This might take a few weeks or a few months until the picture is
is
clear
clear.
enough
But
for
you're still
all
hopeful
the
that
people.
things might turn out for the better if Hamas reconsiders. Now, let me pull you into the conversation here, Mr. Muslim. How do you see this development? And do you, especially considering that as the political parties continue to be at loggerheads, that really comes in the way of bringing any kind of resolution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict in the region?
Thank you. We have to look at this development in the context of the occupied Palestine. We're talking about a political system that exists under occupation. We are not an independent state in which a president can maneuver politically in order to gain more strength. We are talking about a country under occupation. It is very unfortunate that this recent move comes, I would say, as a confirmation of a series of unilateral moves by President Mahmoud Abbas. He further isolates himself from the rest of the Palestinian political forces. He has expanded the Palestinian Legislative Council a few weeks ago, of course, using a constitutional court that he appointed 2 years ago. And he continued to ignore the results of the reconciliation talks that were agreed upon by the Palestinian factions in Cairo repeatedly. So what he's doing now is basically undermining the Palestinian national institutions. The Palestinian division is getting worse. This is something that no sane Palestinian would like to see. But it is very unfortunate that in order to gain political mileage and to consolidate power, President Abbas is pushing the rest of the Palestinian political groups out of the political system. Now, we're talking about the Palestinian Authority, of course, not talking about the Palestinian Liberation Organization, but the Palestinian Authority has, in recent years, swallowed the rest of the Palestinian national institutions. It is basically the place where power play happens. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank are more isolated than each other than any other time in history because of these unilateral political moves. It is very necessary now to come back to reconciliation discussions and to the table of internal Palestinian dialogue where a national reform agenda can take place. We need a national vision. We can't afford to see Palestinians divided while the Israeli government is getting further to the right and annexing more Palestinian land, expanding settlements. It is time President Abbas thinks of a national salvation government in which each and every significant Palestinian political group is involved and which will pave the way for national dialogue and elections. And elections won't be a solution, by the way. In fact, it was a transparent elections in 2006 that resulted in the division of the Palestinian political system.
Okay,
we
so
need national dialogue.
Hold on to that thought, Mr. Muslim. Let me bring this back to you as we're talking about Mahmoud Abbas's real intentions here. And this question is for you, Mr. Rami. I mean, analysts are seeing this move. Hamdallah was there for 5 years, and now having accepted his resignation, it kind of is seen by analysts as a way of isolating Hamas even further, which remains, of course, his political rival. How does this translate into the international community? Is this a correct interpretation of Abbas's stance?
I would like to say here that the government of Rami al-Hamdallah has installed since 2014, okay, and this government has so far failed to bring a kind of unity for the Palestinians. It was assigned with bringing about an end to the division. And while this government has failed so far to bring an end to the division, I think the president wanted to take that a step. It is actually based on the failure of both Hamas and Fatah negotiations by both parties in Egypt and other parts to reach a sort of reconciliation based on some understandings. The main of these understandings, was that Hamas hands over full responsibilities for Gaza to the consensus government of Rami al-Hamdallah. And the latest decision by the Palestinian Authority to withdraw its employees from the Rafah crossing terminal in Gaza was a part of the Palestinian Authority's reservation over Hamas's failure, over Hamas's inability to hand over full responsibilities for the government from Allah. But I believe that Abbas's decision is a part of this, is mainly based on that his government he installed in 2014 is unable to bridge the gap between both Hamas and Fatah, and unable to take the lead in Gaza and the West Bank and all other Palestinian territories. Now, I would like to refer to very, very basic and deep difference between both Hamas and Fatah, the difference over the platform. You know that the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah Party of Palestinian President Abbas is taking one main platform, which is honoring peace process, honoring negotiations, even if they are unending negotiations with Israel, while the Hamas party, the Islamist Hamas party that had a majority in the Legislative Council in 2006 is honoring the resistance against the Israeli occupation, mainly the armed resistance against the Israeli occupation. This is the deepest difference between the two parties. While in case or unless these two parties reach a sort of an understanding or a sort of a compromise over their platforms, there might be some sort of a breakthrough in the upcoming months or weeks. And things will turn better and better for all the Palestinian
Let's
people.
hope they do turn better. But here, Mr. Muslim, let me get your take on this. Do you agree or what that Fatah, they have justified this move because blaming Hamas for not being part of the peace process, not having the same agenda, and refusing to deal with the government of national reconciliation? Or do you agree with this, that this is the reason? But isn't this, and if it is the reason, then isn't this also counterproductive in trying to push Mahmoud Abbas's agenda of peace and reconciliation in the region with Israel?
You see, the Palestinian issue has been reduced to smaller segments. Now we're talking about a government in the West Bank and Gaza. Palestine is not the West Bank and Gaza. There are 7 million Palestinian refugees in the diaspora. There are Palestinians under direct Israeli occupation in 1948 territories. The West Bank and Gaza are the result, the government in the West Bank and Gaza is the result of the Oslo Agreement, which apparently failed. And I believe that the other issue that you raised earlier is the it's the Israeli request for the temporary international troops to pull out of the city of Hebron.
Yes, we're getting to that story, but we're trying to understand better the dynamics of the politics of power play that is over here. We'll get to Hebron right after this.
Has failed, and that's why we are having a very divided Palestinian political system. It was that mistake that resulted into these consequences. But anyway, if the Palestinian political system is to be reformed and to be to survive all these difficulties, it is necessary for President Abbas to bring everyone to the negotiating table, Palestinian negotiating table, to agree upon a national agenda. He cannot continue to decide on behalf of every Palestinian while discrediting the rest of the Palestinian political groups. We are talking about major Palestinian political forces, not only Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which are outside the folds of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We're talking about major Palestinian factions like the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, the National Initiative, and others who do not agree, who do not necessarily agree with President Abbas's policy. We're talking about a major faction within Fatah itself, which has been disowned by President Abbas over the years, especially in Gaza. So we need to come back to a roundtable discussion where all Palestinian major forces can come to agreement on what's next. We are facing a serious challenge posed by the Israeli occupation, an existential challenge now, especially in the West Bank. That's why we have to agree upon what's next. No one person can decide for the rest of the Palestinian nation what has to be done. With all due respect to President Abbas, he was elected in 2005 and his presidency was supposedly to last for 4 years. We have not had presidential elections ever since then. I'm not saying that his legitimacy is at stake. In fact, the legitimacy of the whole Palestinian political system is at stake. The problem is not constitutional. The problem is a political problem.
It's a political problem. And do you agree? Do you agree with what Mr. Muslim
on their agenda?
Right. And do you agree with what Mr. Muslim is saying here, Mr. Rami, especially with reference to the other factions, the other political parties feeling isolated, being left out of the conversation here, especially considering that all of them are facing the same existential threat, that is the Palestinian-Israel conflict? Doesn't this take away from the bigger issue at hand? How do you see this resolving? And what's your take on it as Mr. Muslim's version came through?
Actually, what I'm going to say is that the Palestinian political factions that belong to the Palestine Liberation Organization, they belong to this Palestinian Liberation Organization, which had signed the peace agreements, the Oslo peace agreements, the Oslo peace accord with Israel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. They had signed, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which involves all other political factions, excluding Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, are the ones who agreed to the Oslo Peace Accord in 1993. And the Palestine Liberation Organization is the one is representing the whole Palestinian people worldwide, the whole Palestinians, whether those in the West Bank, in Gaza, Lebanon, Jordan, and in diaspora and other European countries. This is the main body that represents the Palestinian people all over the world. And this main body is the one which had signed the Oslo Peace Accords with Israel in 1993 in Washington. So I do believe that these factions, at this very critical moment of the Palestinian people's cause, have to decide decisively, have to take a sort of a decisive way, whether they should continue committing to a failed peace process with Israel, or to jump out of this peace process. This is the main criteria, the main point that the Palestinians should be deciding on at this very critical moment of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, especially amidst what is being heard about the deal of the century being proposed by Washington and other international players in the world.
I'm glad you highlight this, because this comes at a time not just after the acceptance of the resignation, something we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu come and say that I will not renew the mandate of the temporary international presence in Hebron. It really puts together a very tense situation in that city, where majority of them are Palestinians. And we're looking at a highly militarized zone by the Israeli forces there. How do you see this problem resolving, especially as the Norwegian foreign minister also commented that we are expecting more conflict to rise there, more the death toll to go up, more conflict to go on? How do you see this issue resolving in light of what is developing politically?
I think that all of the Israeli measures in the West Bank, throughout the West Bank, should be condemned and should be denounced by the international players who are concerned about peace in this part of the world. You know that Russia has a leverage. Russia, as a state, as a major state, as a key state in the world, has a leverage over the politics in this region. And Russia is going to welcome all the Palestinian factions soon in Moscow in order to find a solution for the Palestinian problem. I think that these countries or these key players should work parallelly on two tracks: the Palestinian internal tracks and the Israeli-Palestinian track. I mean, the Israeli measures should be condemned and stopped by the international players in order to pave the way for a real peace process between Palestinians and Israelis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rami, for your valuable input there. And very quickly, if I could get your take on it, Mr. Muslim, the last 30 seconds or so, Mahmoud Abbas still is the principal interlocutor here. He is the main decision maker here, despite what is happening politically. How does this impact policy in light of what just Mr. Rami mentioned in the international community?
You see, the international solidarity movement with the Palestinians is still on the rise, and there are supporters for the Palestinian right everywhere. So President Abbas should actually count on this and should use the leverage of this international support to push for isolation of the Israeli occupation and uniting the national front. Unfortunately, he has been missing this opportunity. I do believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not a leader who you can talk peace to. That's why President Abbas should not waste his time waiting for Netanyahu. He should first unite the Palestinian National Front, bring over the rest of the Palestinian factions to form one national agenda, one national government.
But do you feel, and again, very quickly, last question, do you feel that the Palestinians in Hebron are going to suffer as a result of this discontent we see in the political parties with Mahmoud Abbas leading this?
Well, the Palestinians are suffering from Israeli occupation. The failure of President Mahmoud Abbas is, of course, making it worse. But the main problem is the Israeli occupation. And the daily life of Palestinians in Hebron and the rest of the West Bank is heavily affected by the expansion of the settlements and Prime Minister Netanyahu's expansionist policies. So Palestinians are suffering both ways because of the
internal conflict as well as the occupied
Israeli
forces.
Occupation.
Thank you so much, Mr. for your valuable input here at Newswire. We've unfortunately run out of time. We will take a quick short break.